Okay, colleagues, it's just after 4 o'clock. I'll call the meeting to order. Hope everyone's having a great summer. And here we go with our SPPC meeting. I'll look for any disclosures of pecuniary interest. Okay. There are none. And so let's move our way through the consent items. Does anyone want 2.1, 2.2, or 2.3 pulled? Okay, I'll just look for a motion then for all three. Moved by Councillor Park, second by Councillor Turner. It'll be up on screen in a moment. Oh, go ahead, Deputy Mayor Hubert.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to comment on 2.2, which is a development charges study in the UWRF retirement. And I want to congratulate all of our staff and the industry and LDI for their work together on this file. I remember 10 years ago, it looked like a train that was coming down the track of unfunded liability for the city, and there was significant and substantial concern about it, and to see the word retirement after those four letters is of great comfort. And Mr. Yeoman, you got a smile on your face, as does Mr. Hayward. You know exactly what I'm talking about. We've come a long way, and very positive, but it's a really I think symbolic of the collaboration that has happened between both the industry, their advocacy group, LDI, and city staff, and so well done. And I thank you for that report.
Okay, if there are no additional speakers, Councillor Van Holst.
Yes, thank you very much. Looking at item number 2.3 in our strategic plan progress variance, it's largely talking about the smart cities strategy. And although that's been put off a little bit, I'm sure there's lots of exciting things to happen about that. And I just wondered if I might ask a question through you to our staff, if they might be able to tell us some of the interesting things that are being considered.
Sorry, Your Worship, I thought that Mr. Fleming was behind me, but he isn't. In terms of some of the items that are being looked at, it's anything from looking at how civic government can get involved in accelerating certain ideas to actually looking at some massive infrastructure requirements as well. Obviously, this comes in terms of looking at all the alternatives that we have by way of vision. But there's a lot of work that needs to be done in terms of setting the expectations and putting them out in terms of the budget and when they can be delivered. So that's a little bit off yet, but certainly in terms of the breadth of it, the ideas are definitely there. Again, all the way from the civic accelerator piece and labs to purchasing policy to infrastructure requirements.
Any other speakers? There are none, so let's call the question. We can open that vote. Councillor Snell,
yay.
Yay, thank you.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 15-0.
Okay, colleagues, this is now time for items for direction. We'll go to 4.1. This is review of council established task force, working groups, and special committees. We have a communication from Councillor Squire. Councillor Squire.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. As I mentioned at the last meeting, we had council has already given direction to staff to review the at various advisory committees, and I think I provided a bit of an explanation last time that some of the committees now are not meeting regularly. Some, the other parties, such as the school boards that participate in those meetings, have indicated that they're not participating in them anymore and have sort of created their own way of communicating with City Hall. So I think it's time that we, in addition to reviewing the advisory committees, that we also review the other committees of council, not the standing committees, not the boards, but the various committees that we have. I think from the point of view of efficiency, maybe they'll all stay, maybe some will go, but I think it's the right time to do it. So that's why I brought this matter forward. And I'll move it. I didn't go looking for a seconder, but hopefully I'll have one.
Councillor Hopkins, are you seconding? Great. Second, and I'll recognize you now.
Thank you, and I have no problem seconding the recommendation to look into our task forces and working groups and special committees, et cetera. I am kind of curious to know, though, how many are we looking at just in terms of the volume of work that may have to come forward?
Clerk Saunders.
Thank you, Your Worship. That's a good question because I haven't added them all up. I believe we have 13 or 14 advisory committees, and we have probably 6 or 7 additional working groups or special task force.
Deputy Mayor Hubert.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I just would have a question on how this would impact the establishment of those new working groups and, you know, with the new council in terms of the timing of that.
Let's look to the clerk to get a sense of what the timeline might look like.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, we will be working on it throughout the fall while we're doing the election at the same time. So we'll be reaching out to the advisory committees and to members of council to get their opinions, and we would report back before the end of this term because the new term of council would be appointing in December to those, well, advisory committees are February of 2019, but the other ones would be December 1st.
Okay, that would be my only concern, that it would in some way impact the, you know, the full ramp up of the new term.
Councillor Rusher.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I don't have any objections at looking at this. The last time I remember we tried this, we didn't do it. We tried this was 1999. And I remember distinctly because I was, there was a great uproar for what happened at the time is that they announced some of the committees that they wanted to eliminate. They wanted to combine everything down to, I think it was either 4 or 5 advisory committees. The problem that I have, and I think that the clerk would be in a better position to address this, is that 6 months is not a good enough time to be able to do this. I don't believe that we could do it efficiently and effectively within the next 4 to 6 months. And I do think that, I think the clerk is right, we have to reach out to members of the committees and to council. But I also feel that there are lots of people out in the community that have a great deal of interest in these advisory committees, and it's only fair that we reach out to them too. So to get into those focus groups, it's going to take a little bit more than what we might anticipate around this horseshoe. Again, I say it, I don't have a problem with looking at it because we don't even know how we would want it, if we want to reduce this, how we would reduce it, what would be combined and so on. So I just caution council on that. Thank you.
Any other speakers? Councillor Van Holst and then Councillor Helmer.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just looking at things again is a good idea. There's a word in here I'm not sure if I like. It's comprehensive. For me, it's kind of like the word endorsement and the phrase preliminary preferred option. I wonder if we might, I just want to know how much work is being expected there. So I'm asking through you to mover what's meant by a comprehensive review as just opposed to a review.
For me, comprehensive means exactly what comprehensive means, which is a complete and total review.
So, Councillor Van
Okay,
Holst.
thank you. So I think that
Yeah.
we're asking staff to do a lot of work, and I don't know if it's necessary to do that much. Mind you, I think that our new smart cities strategies probably has some possibilities here too. We might end up changing the entire structure of this. Of course, we might have a system whereby people get on the committee, but if the committee doesn't necessarily meet, they can just provide their responses online, and we can have that sort of a dynamic. There's certainly websites for programming. One's called Stack Overflow. If somebody has a question, they put it in, and everybody who's got relevant feedback adds that information. That might be another way to go in order for us to get help from the community. You know, I may support this, but again, I think I'd like us to see just an idea of where to go rather than necessarily do a huge report on these things. I don't know if it's always necessary.
Okay, thank you. We'll work our way through the speakers list. A couple of speakers have indicated concern about timeline and the amount of work. I just want to reiterate, the clerk has indicated 4 to 6 months with the current workload is completely doable. And it's a direction that she's very comfortable taking on with her team. And I think that's an important element of the debate. Councillor Helmer and then Councillor Ridley.
Thank you. So I just wanted to go over the scope of what we're talking about to make sure I understand which special committees and task forces would be included. So I guess through the chair, perhaps the clerk could confirm the governance working group is one of them. The audit committee is one of them. The waste management working group, the rapid transit implementation working group, the committee of revision, the Dearness Committee of Management, the County City Liaison Committee, the Town and Gown Committee. These are the committees we're talking about.
Clerk Saunders.
Through Mr. Mayor, not all of those. We would be not looking at the audit committee because that's a quasi standing committee of council, so that's not one we would look at. Court of revision is, we're required to have one under legislation, so we would continue to have that one. The city county liaison, yes. Town and gown, yes. The waste and the rapid transit would be ones that we would be looking at, yes.
And Dearness?
Dearness again is legislated, so we're required to have that.
Okay, so thank you for that. I went and looked at of course, the list of special committees and task forces on our website, and I'll tell you that's where the audit committee is listed. That's why I'm checking on it. The committee of revision and the Dearness Committee of Management, those are 3 of the 6 that are listed, and the rest are working groups. I'm on all these working groups, and frankly, I don't really see a problem with any of them. They have specific mandates. The Waste Management Working Group is working through a very specific thing, and when it's done, it's over. The Governance Working Group, again, got a very specific mandate, and it's been added to, through resolution of council, what it is working on, and the working group is working through all those things. So I think those ones are both fine. Rapid Transit Implementation Working Group, I think, was a big improvement over the long-term growth working group for LTC. And again, I think it has a very specific focus on rapid transit. So I don't see a huge amount of value in evaluating those 3 working groups. Committee of revision, I don't think we're gonna make any changes. Audit committee, obviously, we're not gonna make any changes. I do think the County City Liaison Committee, the Town and Gown Committee, I think Dearness is fine. I've gone to a couple of those meetings. I think we should be focused in on what we wanna change if there are ones that are not functioning very well. But I don't know about the whole scale review of, especially for example, the Waste Management Working Group. Like it's about halfway done, maybe more, all of the work that needs to be done in that working group. By the time we've done the review, it might be all wrapped up. So I'm not sure what's to be gained by reviewing some of those key working groups. And I just raised that for my colleagues to consider. I think at this point, because the scope is so broad, I probably wouldn't support it.
Councillor Ridley.
Thank you, and I didn't intend to make any comments because I think in principle, I understood the direction that this was going and am generally supportive of it. In fact, I believe I made the motion a couple of years ago to start this process, and so I want to remind people that a lot of the work in the motion itself, the potential recommendation there, has already been directed and is already underway. So what I took of the intent of this was simply to add on a review of the task force working groups and special committees. So I wasn't going to say anything, but some of the comments that I heard from some of my colleagues were talking about, you know, doing everything. And I just want to take the opportunity to remind people that everything, all those other pieces are already being reviewed and that report is due back. And to me, this was just about the extra pieces, the working group, the task force and special committees. And so I support a review of that. I think like Councillor Helmer stated that by the time the review is done, some of the elements and some of the groups will just be done by way of default and having completed their mandate. But I see nothing wrong with us reviewing it and making recommendations to the next council in terms of moving forward in continuity of the groups if needed.
Councillor Squire.
Just, I always love bringing motions. I think we're overthinking this a little bit. This is just to give an opportunity to look at some of those committees, and I mentioned them before, that aren't operating correctly. If there's a group that's operating well, as Councillor Helmer says, then you spend 5 minutes on it. You say, this is a committee that we all agree is working well. Let's move on to the next issue. But I didn't want to exclude anything from the beginning, so everybody would have an opportunity to have their input. But there are committees right now that are not meeting at all. The 2 school board liaison committees, if we go ahead and appoint people to those committees next year, they will find immediately upon being appointed that there's no meetings and that the 2 school boards don't want to have those meetings anymore. They'll also find out that the town and gown committee almost never meets anymore. So I think there's going to be some that are relatively easy, and it's a cleanup sort of thing. But I recognize what people are saying. There's an issue with the timeline. We can deal with that. The issue of committees that are working well, of course, they'll stay. So I don't want to overthink it, certainly from my point of view, and I think it's a process the clerk can easily do.
Okay, I have no additional speakers. Last call. Okay, I'll call the question. If you could open the vote, please.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 12-3.
Okay, colleagues, let's move then to 4.2. This is the resignation from the London and Middlesex Housing Corporation Board of Directors. There's also an added communication. I'll go to Councillor Hopkins to speak to this.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I just want to bring to my colleagues the letter that was submitted from the board requesting that the selection for a new board member be put off until the new term council. And as you can see in the letter, the request is also to have interviews, and the discussion at the board was it would more or less take the same amount of time. If we go through that process getting into October before a new appointment, we might as well wait for new applications coming in, and I'm just hoping that my colleagues will support the request.
Okay, so I'll interpret that as just a move to receive the communication. And a seconder, Councillor Usher. And Councillor Usher, did you want to speak?
Yes, Mr. Chair, thank you very much. I fully agree with the letter. I would have thought that this would have been the appropriate process anyway, because if the end of the term is the end of the council term, they need to just fit in with everything else that we generally do at the beginning of the new term. But more than that, I really appreciate the fact that they have indicated some of the criteria that they need for the position to fill the gap, so to speak, and I certainly would support and receive this letter.
Thank you for seconding. Other speakers? Councillor Morgan?
Yes, I'm happy to support the direction that's going. The only thing I would add is I just appreciate and I know we all do, the work that Michael has done on his time on the board. Oddly enough, Michael and I have overlap in like all aspects of my life. Not only do we have this relationship as a counselor and a board member, he also works in the same building on the same floor as me, and we take a karate class together, so we get out our disagreements, you know, on the mat, which is great. But he really cares about the board. He's taking on extra work, and it's unfortunate to see him go, and hopefully he'll be able to contribute to some of our boards and commissions in the future, because he's quite a smart gentleman and has added a lot of value over the years.
So that's been moved and seconded. Any other speakers? Yeah, moved to receive. That was seconded by Councillor Asher.
2 letters, right?
Yeah, that's right. The original and the added. Yeah, okay. So no other speakers? Let's call the question. Can you open the vote, please?
Closing the vote, the motion carries 15-0.
That brings us to 4.3. This is the 11th report of the Governance Working Group. Councillor Ridley.
Thank you. I thought I had an easy report to present to council. The Governance Working Group worked very hard and always do work very hard at reviewing all the policies as directed by council. That being said, I received an email from the clerk today that there are a couple minor tweaks that might slow us down a little bit. And so I will perhaps lean on the clerk a little bit to help me to put this in the right order. I do have an email, so I believe I should be putting clauses 1.1, 2.1, 2.2, 3.1, C and D, 3.1, A, except for 16, 13, and 44 on the floor right now.
The clerk says that sounds perfect. So that's been moved by Councillor Ridley and seconded by Councillor Armstrong.
Thank you. And to complicate things a little bit, or just to maybe provide clarity, 3.1 has been amended by adding a following Part G that reads as follows. The attached revised proposed bylaw, Appendix B16, be introduced at Municipal Council meeting to be held on July 24th to repeal and replace Council Policy CPOL 18A 144, being the Mayor's New Year's Honors List policy, and replace it with a new Council policy entitled the Mayor's New Year's Honors List policy. So there was a correction there. It had to do with an incorrect bylaw number. H, and this is the flags at City Hall policy, and the note there again was an incorrect bylaw number. 3.1 needed a new part I, which was to receive, and then a couple of minor word tweaks, and I think we've got it.
So that was moved by Councillor Ridley, seconded by Councillor Armstrong. We'll deal with everything at the same time. It'll come up on screen in a combined fashion. Any other speakers? Councillor Asher.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to add to what the committee chair has said with respect to the 3 items, the 3 added items, the first 3 anyway, with respect to the Mayor's New Year's Honors List, to add that 1 item. Also, with respect to the flag, there's some clarity with respect to flag raising. I know of organizations, non-profit organizations, who are always asking for the flags to be raised, and I have an answer now to give to one of them that have been asking me, so I really appreciate that. And with respect to the race relations policy, I think that that's really good that we are having this, and I look forward to the continuing discussion and conversation on this subject in the future. So thanks for adding those. I appreciate it.
Councillor Park.
Thank you. Very briefly on the flags, I just wanted to thank the clerk for the work that's been done in the addition of the Indigenous communities into that policy. I know that's something that Councillor Cassidy and I had asked to see, and thank you for that work on that.
Councillor Armstrong.
Can't give you the exact number because I lost the spot. It'll take me minutes to find it, but Through you, your worship, to maybe the city manager, it's about item number 6, hiring of employees policy. And I support what's here, but I guess the concern I had, and it's because over the time I keep hearing this, this concern being raised by individuals who apply here, especially for summer employment, and that I hear that maybe staff's family are being given some preferential consideration when it comes to hiring, especially that summer group. And I don't know if we have a policy about that or not. Obviously, it's not covered here, but I just want to understand from the city manager, again, I don't have names and dates and that sort of thing, but are we monitoring that kind of thing just to make sure that that's not going on?
Mr. Hayward, Mr. Cox says.
So first of all, your worship, to say that staff are hiring their own children would be not true. Right off the hop, I'll say that. In terms of our children of staff hired from time to time, yes, they are. But they go through an appropriate process, and that process actually is one that does not, sometimes the names are screened out and that type of thing, but I could let Mr. Coxhead get into that in more detail.
Thank you, through your worship. With respect to the hiring of employees, we've had an extensive review to try to avoid nepotism in our hiring policy. We cannot discount or not allow employees to apply, or employees' children to apply. They'll be afforded the same opportunities as anyone else in the context of those. The major thing that we're doing with respect to training of hiring managers and our HR staff is with respect to declaring conflicts and ensuring those that have an influence over decision-making don't exercise that influence in decision-making. But if you were to look at our hiring, the folks that we've hired, there are names that you would recognize in the pool from time to time. But this policy was written in an effort to avoid nepotism as requested by council, and that's the work that we did to accomplish that.
Thank you, and it was my error. I should have gone to the committee chair first, and so Councillor Ridley, if you had anything that you wanted to say at this time, again, my apologies.
Thank you. I try to be up to speed on all of the committees I chair and able to provide answers as the chair. And so the councillor's referring to Schedule B, page 51, and it clearly outlines the policy as set by council, which both Mr. Hayward and Mr. Cox had talked about. Talks about applicants who have close relatives who are employed by the corporation shall not be excluded, and that anyone in a position of hiring must declare if they have a relative who's applying and not participate or influence the decision, which is what Mr. Cox had said. So that is the policy that my committee reviewed and is presenting to council for consideration and approval today.
Councillor Helmer.
I mostly wanted to point out what Councillor Ridley just said, but I will say that we did direct a civic administration to deal with this last year. I believe it was Councillor Salee who brought this forward, and there were changes made at that time. This is literally reformatting it into the policy template.
Other speakers? Okay, it's been moved. Councillor Cassidy. Councillor Salee.
It's been moved already, right? Your worship, sorry. Okay, thank you. I just want to add my thanks to Councillor Parks, to the clerk for bringing forward the flags, the change to the flag bylaw. This year, 2018, will be the 222nd anniversary of the signing of the London Township Treaty. And I know we were able to fly the flags last year, and it was the first time it was any kind of official recognition of the treaty. And I think it's a beginning of a process that we have to go through where an education process, because the London Township Treaty is not simply an Anishinaabe treaty. It's all of our treaty, because when you have a contract, it's not just the contract that belongs to one party. It's all the parties to the contract. So As I said, I think this is the beginning of an education process in the City of London for recognition of the importance of this treaty, because this is what led to the City of London being where it is. So, thanks.
Other speakers? Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Let's call the question. If we could open that vote, please.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 15-0.
Okay. So we'll move to 4.4. I'll just speak to it briefly from the chair. I've got some time away in the weeks to come. I will be in and out of the city, but I felt it was best, recognizing that Deputy Mayor Hubert is also in and out of the city over that period of time, that we appoint one of our members. I'm suggesting that we consider Councillor Usher for the sole reason, well, two reasons. One, he's a great leader. And the second is he's not running in the next municipal election. And you might be the person for the job for that reason as well. So I'll just look for any speakers. So moved by Councillor Van Holst, seconded by Deputy Mayor Hubert. Any speakers? Okay. I will ask one more time and call the question. And we're voting. Councillor Usher will be by to measure the blinds in no time. Councillor Usher.
I just wonder if I have authority to change the name of the city to the Sensational City.
No one's going to try and stop you.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 15-0.
Okay, so we're now on to deferred matters and additional business. I don't believe there is any. So we'll look for a mover and a seconder to go into closed session for the confidential matters that are outlined in 6.1 and 6.2 of the agenda. Moved by Councillor Van Holst, seconded by Councillor Hopkins. Any discussion? Let's call the question. We'll be meeting, I believe, in Committee Room 3, and we'll likely adjourn from Committee Room 3 as well. And we're voting. That was fast.
Oh, we're not done yet. Councillor Turner?
Maybe not. Councillor Turner is voting manually, yay.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 15-0.
Okay, thanks everybody. We'll see you in Committee Room 3.